Hello and welcome everyone to the Against the Stream podcast. We have today a special episode on the US elections with a special guest, Alan Woods, a member of the International Secretariat of the Revolutionary Communist International, as well as the author of many books, including The History of Philosophy, Marxism and the USA, and many more that we recommend everyone here to go and look into. Alan, we are meeting here today because the US elections is not just the business of America, but with America being the greatest economic and military force on the planet, something that will have great repercussions all throughout the world. And I thought we could start with just going through the results that have come in so far, the breaking results that Donald Trump has won. We didn't expect them so early, but we got them already. It was clear already from the morning that he's won the elections with 51% of the total vote counted so far, 71,500,000 votes, which means that so far, with still some states remaining to be counted, he's got 277 votes, which is far beyond the majority that is now guaranteed for him. On the other side, you have Kamala Harris, who has gotten 47.5% of the vote, with 66 million votes in total. Now that is a convincing victory, much more convincing than it was last time around. In fact, Kamala Harris, as far as we know so far, has not managed to do better than Joe Biden in any constituency throughout the U.S. We also have the so-called battleground states, where 3 of them so far has been flipped, i.e., they've gone from voting Democrat last time to Republican. That's Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, which was a significant one, and Georgia. And we're still awaiting results coming from some of the other states. What are your comments on this first sort of overview and set of results?
Well, this morning I was woken up by a very strange noise. And at first I couldn't work out what the noise was. But then I gradually realized as I woke up that it was the noise of jaws dropping in every government office and chancellery on both sides of the Atlantic. Absolute blank astonishment. Trotsky once pointed out that theory, Marxist theory that is the superiority of foresight over astonishment. Now, to some extent, I could say that with a certain level of foresight, it was possible to predict this result. Yes, but not to this extent. I thought that Trump was going to win, although all the polls, by the way, if you remember, for months, certainly for weeks, were arguing that it was a dead heat. It was neck and neck. It was a toss of a coin who was going to win. Well, not so. In fact, they increasingly were implying, they couldn't say so openly that it'd be too blatant a lie, but they were increasing because they've been building up this creature, what's her name? Kamala Harris. I believe that's what she's called. Yes, she's such an insignificant person. I can never remember her name. She's like Joe Biden in that respect. But in any case, they've been building it up because Joe Biden was clearly senile, for goodness sake, and clearly out of it. He stubbornly was clinging to his position and stubbornly refusing. By the way, let's not forget, people forget these things, not so long ago, only this time last year, I think, or thereabouts, he was unanimously proclaimed the official candidate of the Democrat Party. I mean, not just by a majority, not just by a big majority, unanimously. So what the hell is going on in the American Democratic Party, I ask, that they choose a man of that type unanimously to represent them? And of course, he stumbled at the first hurdle, as they say in horse racing circles, with his famous debate with Trump. I never forget the look on Trump's face as Biden was speaking. He apparently said, "Oh, the commentators say, well, he's very cruel because he was making fun of Biden." I don't think he was making fun of Biden when he said, "I can't understand what he's saying," because nobody could understand what he was saying, and the expression was quite on his face was quite understandable. Anyway, as you know, to go into his past history, Biden was forced to resign. He didn't want to. He steadfastly refused, although it was clear if this man, the only reason they got rid of Biden, by the way, is not that they disagreed with any of the appalling mess that he's made as president. I think he's probably one of the worst, if not the worst president in American history. And that's saying something, because they've had some pretty bad characters. But anyway, no, it's not because of any of Biden's policies, which are absolutely appalling. And I would argue, objectively, against the interests of American imperialism, as a matter of fact, against America's national interest. But leave that to one side. No, that wasn't the reason. The only reason they got rid of him is because they were afraid, quite rightly so, that he could not win an election against Trump. And that's perfectly obvious. Now, by the way, it's equally obvious that his successor, Kamala Harris, also was not capable of winning against him.
Yes.
That's the central question that we have to analyze.
It seemed like it almost came as a surprise to them, because this wasn't supposed to happen.
Precisely.
Everything had been geared up and prepared. Yeah. You had the court cases against Trump. Yeah. You had every single media outlet pouring in, and one story after. In particular, the last few weeks, they were really laying it on thick, mobilizing the full scope of the media.
This is what's known as democracy. You see, this is known as democracy. All the cards were stacked. It is clear the establishment was ganging up on this man, on Trump, determined at all costs, come what may, come hell or high water, to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. We'll come to the reasons why that was the case. Yeah. And that's an interesting question. We'll leave that for later on. But as you correctly say, this was not supposed to happen. Good heavens above. I can't think of another man. I mean, you can say what you like about Trump. I'm not a Trump supporter. I hasten to add, I wouldn't have voted for Donald Trump or Kamala Harris if it comes to that, because both of them ultimately represent the interests of the rich and powerful, not the working class at all. But nevertheless, there is a difference between them, and I'll come to that later on. Yeah. However, they tried everything to keep Trump. How he survived, God only knows. It's only because of his supreme ego and his determination at all costs, come what may, to go to the White House, that he managed to sail through the lot. I mean, it beggars description. Court cases, if I'm not mistaken, he was actually convicted. I don't know what the number of court cases, which escapes me, but he was actually convicted, if you believe it, on 34 criminal offences, 34 criminal cases. And they keep on saying, these bastards in the BBC, the British media, oh yes, this is the alternatives between the first woman president. How great it is to have a woman president. Wonderful, isn't it? Same as it was great in Britain to have a woman prime minister, the shape of Margaret Thatcher, if you please. I'm a bit sick of hearing this argument, but there you are. Some people like it. Okay, so if the choice is between Kamala Harris as the first woman president, just imagine it, or the first convicted felon as president. Can you imagine? Instead of saying, which is true, the first, he's not actually the first. I think there was one other over 100 years ago, beginning of the 19th century. I've forgotten his name. But in any case, it's the second case, I think, of a man who lost an election And instead of gracefully going into retirement, which most of them do, he bounces back and he wins with a colossal, fantastic majority. This is amazing. Anyway, 34
Would
criminal
you say,
cases. Go on.
No, I was just saying, just to add to what you were saying, that about a month ago, there was a poll in Gallup that we also referred to in the previous podcast here. But it actually said that of all of Americans, only 40% trusted the executive branch headed by the president. And you had the legislative branch, i.e. the Senate and the House of Representatives of the Congress, was only trusted by 34% of the population.
Yes.
And the mass media was trusted by 31% of the population. Would you think that in reality, the campaign against Trump by these same people have actually strengthened his hand, in a way, played into his hand and make him appear?
I mean, that is an interesting question, but it appears to have done so, because look, as I was saying, 34 criminal cases he was found guilty, and there's a further more than 50, I forgot the exact number, there's another 50 charges pending. Furthermore, if that wasn't enough, he's been ordered to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in civil cases in relation to goodness knows what, rape, and I don't know what other crimes he's supposed to have committed. But you see, every criminal charges, every trial that was held against him only succeeded in increasing his support in the polls. That's an actual fact. He commented on that himself, and it's right. With every court case, his support in the polls increased. And therefore, all the numerous attacks against him, and it is astonishing, it would have destroyed a lesser person, I think, but Trump is the sort of guy, he doesn't seem to care less about things like that. All the numerous attacks against him rebounded and turned against their authors, who he accused, correctly in my view, of a political conspiracy to prevent him from re-entering the White House, neither more nor less. If before you come back, I've no doubt you've got something to say on this, but you mentioned the press. Well, look, I've got the figures in front of me here, which my wife actually was analyzing, very painstaking. I've got all the figures, but I'll just give the sum total, if I may. Out of a total of 244 newspapers and magazines and journals of all sorts, okay, in America, and some of them are foreign also, out of a total of 244, 199 supported Kamala Harris, and the grand total supporting Trump was 16.
That's the free democratic press.
This is what's known precisely as a free press, you see. Good job we don't live in Russia, by the way. You only have one line put there. You're only allowed to hear one position. Whereas in America and Britain, of course, we're perfectly free to read any newspaper, which also puts the same line, but that's another matter. We won't go there.
And it's quite ironic, in fact, that they've been...
Sorry, I can't hear you.
And, I fell out. Sorry. I'm just saying that it's quite ironic that they've been pushing the line that there's a threat to democracy, but they've been doing this by bending all of the, the elements of bourgeois democracy itself. But I have this quote from I have an interesting quote about this particular thing, this severe threat to democracy that Donald Trump is supposed to represent. And this is from the New Yorker, I believe. And it's a Democrat in Pennsylvania, in a town called Reading, working class town called Reading. He says, as he was canvassing, I think actually you've put this in your article, which we'll publish on Marxist.com later today. He said he was worried, this is Manuel Guzman, was worried that the margin of victory would be disappointing, given the disconnection between what preoccupied Democrats in Washington, D.C., and what he was hearing from his constituents, many of whom needed multiple jobs to escape poverty, which afflicts a third of Reading residents. Then they quote, "We've become so focused as a national party on saving democracy," he said, "I'm going to be honest with you. I've not heard one person in the city of Reading talk to me about democracy. What they're telling me is, Manny, why is gas so high? Why is my rent so high? No one speaks enough to these issues." What do you think about this comment?
Of course, that goes to the heart of the matter. As for Trump being a threat to democracy, well, first of all, the question is what democracy? Increasingly, this whole myth of so-called American democracy is being exposed for the hollow myth which it is. That nowadays, by the way, in order to be a president, you've got to be a billionaire, apparently, or have
these were the most expensive elections ever.
That's right. It was. But in any case, these people spent money as water. But in any case, you see, the point is, as you say from that quote, for the great majority of Americans, and here's another myth which they've been peddling, that everything was fine. It's hard to see how Trump won these elections, by the way, if everything was so fine as what they say. And they did say it. And they repeated it and repeated it. And I think the British press also repeated it, that under Biden, everything was fine. The United States economy was booming and so on. Well, if you look at the official figures, I suppose it was. In a sense, it was booming. The stock exchange was certainly booming. And certain people were making a hell of a lot of money. Yes, but that didn't apply to the great majority of Americans who do not feel, and that's at the heart of this discussion here. It's at the heart of it. Why did the Democrats fail? Well, because when people thought about it, first of all, the accusation that Trump was going to abolish democracy, you better vote now because you won't have a chance to vote again, all your children for the rest of your life. And so under a Nazi dictatorship and so, which is sheer bullshit. And most people, when they hear that kind of thing, they would say, well, look, funny thing, he was already president not long ago, and he was in the White House and so on. We saw no evidence of this. There was no dictatorship, and we were able to vote again, and he lost the election, from what they say. Now, you see, people, you can tell lies, as Abraham Lincoln said. You can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time. What you can't do is to fool all of the people all of the time, which is what they continue to do. That's why nobody believes the media anymore and the press. They don't believe them. That's why, despite all the colossal press and TV coverage that Kamala got, it didn't save her at all, because nobody believes it anymore. I think that's a fact. And most Americans, of course, are concerned, or ordinary working class Americans are concerned about other things. They ask themselves, do I feel better off now than what I was 4 years ago? The answer is no, I don't. I feel worse off, much worse off. And I was better off when Trump was in the White House. That's what people think. And that's why millions of people all over the state. By the way, what an astonishing result. I mean, you say it wasn't expected that we'd get the result as soon as that. I didn't expect that. I thought we'd be waiting for days. No. It was a quick result because people voted massively and decisively right from the very beginning, the way that they voted. And if you look at the map, I haven't had a chance to look at all the details that I will do by tomorrow. I haven't had a chance to look I'll be writing an article, by the way, as you correctly say, which will be up about now, I think, if people want to look at it.
It should be. As soon as it's up, we will post it in the chat for everyone to read.
Okay, well, that's good news. But in any case, the thing is that the people voted massively. I haven't had a chance to study the figures, but I have seen on the television screens, there's been numerous programs on the elections. You can see the map, which is blue and red, blue being Democrat and red being Republican. A mass of red. I think, by the way, I'm correct in saying that Trump, for the first time, actually won, not just won, he won the majority of the popular vote.
Yes.
Which I didn't expect. I didn't think that would necessarily be. He's won the popular vote. So that's not just a victory, it's a crushing, overwhelming victory. And the question is, because as you've just said, this was not supposed to happen. That's why all the jaws were dropping when the result was announced. Now, the question that we have to pose is, why did it happen? And how did it happen? Now, that's surely the key question that ought to be asked.
Yes. I mean, the main question, if you read the bourgeois media, well, if you have eyes to see, the main question dominating these elections have been the question of the economy. And it's interesting because Harris and the Democrats have not been pushing this very much. They've been pushing the idea that democracy is under threat. But Trump has been pushing the question of democracy. And as I've been preparing for this episode and reading the news in general, what you find is one article after another which says, oh, can't you see the economy is actually doing better and people are actually doing better? It's just because they don't understand it. And it's just that the Democrats can't communicate this properly. As in reality, what they mean is Trump is manipulating you to believe that you are worse off and you're stupid to believe him. And that's the general thing, that the whole of the media has this arrogant approach to say that people are stupid and they believe it when Trump says that they're worse off. But the fact is, if you look at the crude numbers, it's true that since before the pandemic to today, there's officially been a 1% real wage increase, according to official numbers. First of all, that's nothing in and of itself. But in reality, that doesn't cover the vast majority of how Americans feel, in particular, the lowest paid working class people, who have not only lost out in the last 4 or 5 years, but they've been losing out for the past 4 decades. I have a couple of figures here. Almost 40% of Americans say that they live in a household where they've recently been forced to take on an additional income, i.e. another job, to make ends meet. Now, out of those, 38% said that the extra money barely covers their monthly expenses and they have nothing left over. And 23% said that even that does not cover their bills. That is how ordinary people, real working class people, feel this situation. And just one more thing. In an exit poll made today by CNN, they asked 23,000 people as they were voting. They asked whether their family's financial situation was better today than 4 years ago or not. Now, out of these, 45% said that they were worse off than 4 years ago when Joe Biden started. And out of those 45%, 80% voted Trump. That shows you clearly where everything. Trump's main slogan, in essence, was, "What did Biden do for you? What did you get out of these last 4 years? And what did you get out of the last 40 years where the whole establishment, the elite, has been in power?"
Well, I've published a lot of figures about that in my article, which people can read. But you see, when they say that the economy was doing well and people are doing well, they're quite right. But some people are doing much better than others. And the truth of the matter is there's been a colossal increase, a staggering increase in inequality in recent years in the United States. It's unprecedented. And I've got some of the figures here. I won't bore you by dealing with a lot of figures, not necessary. But the top 1% of Americans take 21% of all personal incomes in America, which is more than double the share of the bottom 50%. And that's a staggering figure in and of itself. And the same top 1% own 35% of all personal wealth, while the 10% of poorer Americans own, well, 10% rather of Americans, wealthy Americans that is, own 71%, and yet the bottom 50% own, wait for it, just 1%. Now, there's a staggering level of inequality, and that goes to the heart of the whole business. You see, what you have here is a colossal polarization between rich and poor. An absolute unbridgeable abysm has opened up. A gap has opened up. A gulf has opened up between the wealthiest and the poorest in America, and that very much lies at the heart of this. And of course, this creates colossal discontent, and that's reflected. I mean, people. There was a quote here that. Here's a quote, I think it's from the Wall Street Journal. Voters described specific pressures, including grocery bills, the price of housing, and the fear of war. But many also described larger existential worries about America's destiny. In other words, there's a general feeling of unease, a palpable unease of worry about the future, and of course, a tremendous I would say now, hatred against the rich and the privileged, the establishment, which Trump has very ably tapped into.
One thing that stood out in this campaign was that on the one hand, you had Trump, who's a loose cannon. Is clear. He says one thing one time and another, and he never really controlling what's coming out of it. But he seems to be a human being. He seems to be someone who speaks ordinary people's language, at least tries to. And on the other hand, you have Kamala Harris, who has not been giving any interviews unless it's been 100% scripted. And if anytime she's veered off script, she sounded like a complete incompetent and an idiot in reality. Not much better than not more coherent than Joe Biden in essence. Whereas Trump has come out and tried to at least take on some of the language of the working class.
Well, like I say, you see, I must emphasize here that this program is not supposed to be, it's not defending Donald Trump at the slightest degree. It remains quite a rabid reactionary bourgeois politician. There's nothing progressive about him. However, he's not stupid. He's quite a clever demagogue, put it that way. And for his own reasons, for his own personal reasons, he's got a colossal ego, by the way. For his own reasons, he's deliberately based himself on what is a fact. It's not invented. I didn't invent it. Trump didn't invent it. It was there. This colossal subterranean accumulation of rage. I couldn't put it too strongly. That exists against the injustice of it all, the injustice of the poverty on the one hand and the extreme wealth and luxury and power on the other hand. There's a colossal development. It's a bit like the geology, under the Earth's surface. There's a building up of enormous pressure and colossal temperatures, which is seeking a way out. And eventually, sooner or later, this accumulation of discontent, like the process of geology, will find a way out and will explode one way or another. Now, it has exploded in the States in a very peculiar way, you might say, and you'll be quite right. It's a very peculiar way. And Trump, in a very peculiar reactionary way, if you like, nevertheless, and you can't overlook this fact, does in fact give a voice. That's what you mean when you say he seems like a human being. He as they say in the States, he tells it like it is. Unlike the wretched waffling of the petty boys and the middle-class liberal intellectual snobs from Washington, of which Kamala Harris is a prime example of the sort of thing that most people actually despise and hate. No good at all. Whereas Trump, he seems, although he's a billionaire, he comes across as an ordinary bloke that tells things as they are, that tells the truth, and so what he doesn't always tell the truth, shall we say, to put it mildly. No. But in any case, when he tells a lie, he obviously believes it. That's one thing about it. But in any case,
something else.
But that's his strength, you see. He's basing himself on something that actually does exist, and which the stupid liberal establishment either can't see or refuses to see, more like. This enormous developing tension between the classes, which expresses itself as a growing polarization between the left and the right. And that's, in a funny way, it's reflected by Trump and Trumpism, which, by the way, is a very contradictory phenomenon.
Yeah. I mean, we've said many times, you've said many times that that the whole reason why someone like Trump could rise and develop as he has is because of the vacuum on the left, on the lack of an alternative.
Absolutely.
Of a working class alternative.
Put it this way: had there been a viable left-wing candidate, an alternative candidate in these elections, the whole position could have been different. If, for example, Bernie Sanders would have stuck to his guns, and he was putting forward quite a radical policy originally, then he retreated on that. Then it would have been different, because I believe it's the same audience, but a very similar audience, not entirely, but a large layer of the workers in particular that support Trump were open to Bernie Sanders' ideas. I'll prove it to you. It now emerges, I just discovered this morning, actually consulted something, that a few years ago, I think as far back, if I'm not mistaken, as 2016, Trump was actually studying what Bernie Sanders' speeches, his attacks on big business and so on and so forth. And he used that. It's a fact. It was stated in some biography that emerged some years ago. He copied this because it had an effect. Now, the trouble was, of course, when Sanders capitulated, he betrayed, in effect, to use a harsh term. When he capitulated to the establishment, the Democrat Party establishment, that finished him. And therefore it left the door open to Trump as the only alternative. Let's face it, Trump is the only anti-establishment candidate. He seems to be he is in many ways an anti-establishment candidate. We can expand on that point in a minute if you want.
And then what you have is the lefts. You have all of these left. I've seen on social media quite a few, along with lots of liberals, obviously, howling and crying about, the terrible rise of fascism, and this is the end of things. But I mean, just following on for what you said, the left only has itself to blame for this, precisely for leaving the floor to someone like Trump. And then what they do now is that what they have been doing in these elections, that they've been lining up behind Harris, i.e. continuing the same mistake as before, of making deals with the bourgeoisie in one way or another, and therefore leaving the scene, so to say, or the stage, to someone like Trump demagogically to come and appeal to the angry layers of the working class.
You see, I distinctly remember what happened last time round. When Biden stood against Trump in the last election, what did the so-called left and the so-called liberals say? You must support Biden as the lesser evil. You remember that one? Because if Trump was going to be elected, he was going to be a dictator. He was going to be like Hitler. I don't know what he was going to be like altogether. Okay. So, there's an old saying, be very careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
Because you might get it. You might get more than you bargained for. They got 4 years of Biden and Kamala, and what did that lead to? War in Ukraine, war in the Middle East, Netanyahu given a blank check to slaughter people in Gaza, about which both Kamala Harris and Biden were complicit and remain complicit and still have the same policy.
Yeah.
Falling living standards for the workers and more profits to the rich. What sort of lesser evil is that? I would like to know. It's not a lesser evil, it's worse. Actually, the situation for America and the people of America is arguably far worse now than what it was under Trump last time. Under these wretched so-called Democrats, the so-called lesser evil. And still they learn nothing. As you said, they learn nothing. They're singing the same song. Kamala Harris is the less evil. Come on, give me a break. She'll be a continuation of the same wretched reactionary policies that Biden was carrying out, which she completely agreed with. She's trying to distance herself now, but it's a lie.
Exactly.
So this argument of the so-called left or the so-called liberal must support the lesser evil, that should be knocked on the head sharply and with a very heavy hammer.
Yes, I mean one of the main points during these elections were obviously, besides the economy, was this question of war and the U.S. imperialism as an interventionist force and an active interventionist force around the world, which is increasingly something that Americans are opposed to. You have spoken and written a lot about the Ukraine war. That started off with great fanfare about, 3 years ago, soon to be. But it's not going very well now, is it? And opposition to this war is now, a majority of Americans are now opposed to this war. Trump then could come in and also oppose this. And now we have a new war then in the Middle East, where again, Trump seems to not say too much, but at the same time, he seems to be saying some things about ending this war. I'll just read one quote from him. I think it's from yesterday. He says, We are building the biggest and broadest coalition in American political history. This includes record-breaking numbers of Arab and Muslim voters in Michigan who want peace. They know Kamala and her warmonger cabinet will invade the Middle East, get millions of Muslims killed, and start World War III. Vote Trump and bring back peace. Do you think Trump will bring back peace?
Well, it's very risky. I must caution you. It's very risky to believe anything that Donald Trump says, and because he's very unpredictable. I don't think I don't know what he's going to do. Although I've got a shrewd suspicion of what he will do in the Ukraine. I don't know what he's going to do in the Middle East, though. I don't know. But in any case, the thing is, I don't think he knows. He's a funny man. That's part of the reason why the bourgeois can't stand him into that, because they can't control him, and he's unpredictable. They don't know which way he's going to jump. I don't know either. But see, to go back to the central argument, this is something which we must clarify, because I've heard people on the left, people that I know and I respect, have put forth the argument, well, Kamala Harris or Trump, there's no difference between them. They're the same. Now, with respect, I think that assertion is both right to some extent. It's also wrong in a fundamental respect. Why do I say this? Well, look, both Harris and Trump are obviously representatives of the wealthy, the powerful. Trump is a billionaire, therefore he represents the interests of his class. That goes without saying. But to say that, both of them are reactionary bourgeois politicians, as I have said already. But to say that, you don't say that. You're stating the obvious. Don't have to be very clever to draw that conclusion. However, that's ABC, if you like. But after ABC, there are more letters in the alphabet. And the question must be raised is this. If they are identical, if they are the same, why is it, because that's a fact, that the entire bourgeois establishment in America and abroad was hostile, bitterly hostile to Trump, and was determined to keep him out of power? If they're the same, well, that argument doesn't hold water, does it? The fact of the matter is they are not the same. And Trump has got a different approach. And the main thing why they're frightened of Trump is not because he's a fascist and a Nazi, which he's not. He's a common or garden right-wing bourgeois demagogue, if you like, populist, to use the modern jargon. That's not the reason. The reason is that for his own reasons, as I've said, he's actually appealed to the working class. And by the way, I'll say this about Trump. I'll say this quite plainly, that you can say what you like about Trump, but he is the one that's largely responsible for making the working class central to politics now in the States. Prior to Trump, nobody mentioned the working class, by the way. I challenge you. In the past, very rarely mentioned it anyway. They always talked about the middle class, even the most so-called left-wing Democrats. The middle class, not the working class. It was Trump that started to appeal to the workers and that referred to the exploitation of the workers, the falling living standards, the unemployment, and so on. Okay, he did it from his own standpoint, which is a reactionary standpoint. We don't need to go there. But nevertheless, that's from the standpoint of the ruling class. That's dangerous territory. That's dangerous stuff. And that sets a very dangerous precedent for the future. Because the pendulum can swing to the right, okay. It can also in the future swing sharply to the left. And that's what they're terrified of. That's why they're against Trump. No other particular reason. But to go back to the foreign affairs, well, I don't know what he's going to do, except in relation to the Ukraine, I think he's a bit more clear. He obviously doesn't like Zelensky for a start. He's got his own reasons for that. That's another matter. But in any case, just look at the position. Just think about it from the standpoint of an ordinary American Joe Public, an ordinary American person, As you correctly said earlier on, there are millions of people in the States living in such terrible poverty. And this is the richest country on earth, by the way. What a contradiction that must be. The richest country on God's earth, and you've got millions of people, men, women, and children, sleeping under bridges. Why? Because they've got no home. They're homeless. Because they can't afford to pay the rent. Good heavens above. That's an astonishing state of affairs. They can't afford to live. As you say, they can't afford to live, get to the end of the month without taking on extra jobs and all the rest of it. Okay. And yet, knowing this, Kamala Harris and Biden were prepared to sign away $61 billion to give as a present to Mr. Zelensky and his gang in Kiev. And billions and billions and billions of American dollars have been sent to Ukraine only for the purpose of attacking and weakening Russia. No other purpose. Don't tell me that's in the interest of the Ukrainian people. That's ridiculous. These elements are criminals. They're the worst enemies of the Ukrainian people who have been senselessly slaughtered in a war which they must know they can't win. The Ukraine can't win this war. The war is lost. And there's absolutely nothing that anyone can do to reverse that. The Russians are going to win. That's clear. And Trump, I think, understands this. And Vance certainly understands it. And I've made that clear. And I'm firmly convinced that one of the first things they do, they will want to cut off the aid, the senseless flow of waste. Most of it goes to the oligarchy anyway. It doesn't go to the troops on the front line. You can be sure of that. Or a big slice of it goes to the gangsters anyway. I'm convinced of that. In any case, America can't afford this drain. It can't afford the drain in the Middle East either, but I think Trump is on a bit more dodgy ground, and I'm not sure what he's going to do in this to the Middle East. He's got a very checkered record. But as far as the Ukraine is, I think Zelensky sent him a message, I see, but it wasn't a very convincing message. Zelensky must be trembling in his shoes. No, I think that he will knock the Ukraine, one way or another, he'll knock the Ukraine business on the head, and that'll be a damn good thing, by the way. It'd be a very good thing. It should have been done long ago. And the European governments ought to do the same thing, if they had any sense, which at the moment they don't.
Yes, well, Trump has announced that he will end the war in Ukraine before he gets into power, which I'm sure he will try to do so. But yes, saying in this foreign affairs, obviously, the election of Trump will have colossal repercussions all over the world. Probably many of them we don't even will know. Probably he doesn't even know what he's going to do. But one area which seems to, where he seems determined is he's made this announcement on tariffs. Oh, yes. He's going to introduce blanket tariffs on all imports to the US, and an extra tariff just for Chinese imports. Yeah. What do you think that could have of consequences for world relations and for the world economy?
Well, it's no secret that it's one of Trump's main planks is hostility to China, who he sees as the main enemy, the main rival to the United States as a world power. And of course, he's got a point. But he's not the only one. I think that on that question, I don't think there's much disagreement between the Republicans and the Democrats. They all agree they're against China. But if they go down that road of tariffs and so, which they've started to do already under Biden, is it 100% tariff they've imposed on Chinese goods? I think so.
60%, I think he said.
60%. Well, he'll make it 100, be sure of it, or more. But you see, that will have a damaging effect on world trade, on the world economy, which is in a very fragile state, by the way. And that can have a knock-on effect, and it will have a knock-on effect. He's clear. Trump, really speaking, his instincts are what we would call isolationist. There's a long American tradition of isolationism. In other words, concentrate on America and leave the rest of the world to do whatever they want to do. That's what he would like to do. He made no secret of the fact he's against all entanglements of the US in foreign institutions like NATO, for instance, and the United Nations in particular, and even the World Trade Organization. He's against all of those things. He doesn't want any to be. He would like the Americans to walk away. He'd like America to walk away from all these things. Of course, they can't. And nowadays, of course, the idea that the US can isolate itself from world events and from world economy and so on, it's impossible. It's impossible. Yeah. Nowadays, the entire world is globalization in that sense is a fact. Although now it's beginning to break up into its constituent parts, it's reached its limits, in my opinion. And Trump would like to. Trump is helping it on its way. Globalization was in a ruinous state anyway, and he's just given it. He's like a sick man, and he's just giving it a push.
Yeah.
You know the old Chinese proverb. What do you do? What do you do when you see a man falling?
Yeah, you give him a push.
Give him a push, precisely. That's what he's doing. But you see, the others, of course, are looking at this horrified. All the economists are looking at this policy in absolute horror, shock horror. Also, the Europeans. Although I see my friend Starmer, that bootlicking wretch that calls himself the Prime Minister of Great Britain. He went to America. He went to America, and the Americans told him to bugger off out of it.
Yes, well, the Labour Party sent a whole delegation to support the Harris campaign.
Oh, yes,
especially to show them, to share with them their experience of how to deal with the left.
Yes, that was very effective, wasn't it?
Yes.
Go ahead. No, go on.
And then I noticed that he was one of the first ones to actually congratulate Trump, obviously realizing that he's bet on
First of all, he stabs him in the back, and then he sends him a congratulating letter. Trump will be very impressed by that, I'm sure.
Yes.
He's not a man that forgives and forgets very easily.
Yes. But just to continue down this road on the question of Europe, because the war in Ukraine has already put Europe in a very, very weak position. Yes. We've talked about before that Germany now faces deindustrialization in a very, very rapid time frame. Volkswagen is closing factories. The chemical industry is shutting down. You're looking at mass unemployment, and it's in a very, very difficult situation. Now, Trump, as you said, seems to be going for a position which would accelerate this position. He said, I'm going to leave Ukraine, and you're going to pay for it. The Europeans are going to pay for it. And on top of that, you're going to get tariffs for all your products coming from Europe.
Yes. And the same with NATO. He might. I don't know if he will leave NATO. That's perhaps a step too far. The Pentagon might be opposed to that. But nevertheless, he's demanding that the Europeans pay their way and increase their contributions. In other words, he wants to pass the bills to Europe. Why not? Why not? Let somebody else pay the bills. We're not going to pay them. That's what he's saying. Makes sense from the standpoint of his slogan. You know his slogan, make America great again. America first. Well, America first means the rest of the world last. That includes Europe, but he doesn't care about Europe. Not in the slightest degree.
And then obviously, so Europe seems to me to potentially be the biggest loser in this process that's taking place here. And then on the other side, obviously, you have the rise of China as an important economic force, and now also the rise of Russia as an important world military force. How do you see that the Trump presidency could push this process?
Well, you see, you have to go back to the Biden president. I mean, Biden, the man is mad. I think he's certifiable. He deliberately pushed Ukraine into an unwinnable war with Russia for his own purposes, because he believed that the Ukrainians could win. They could never win that war, but he thought they could win with America's wonder weapons, which have been all shown to be phony. Now, of course, they've lost. They've lost the war completely, irrevocably. It's clear, and that's a catastrophe for the prestige of NATO and America. It's humiliating, much more humiliating than the defeat in Afghanistan. So Trump has got to clear up the mess afterwards. His solution is very simple. Well, look, I'm very sorry, but it's all Biden's fault. Nothing to do with me. This is a European affair. Nothing to do with the US. Our interests are not in the Ukraine, which is true. The Americans don't have any real interest in maintaining the Ukraine. What interest could they possibly have? No, we'll get out. But then we'll pass the bill to Europe, which is, that'll be a body blow. Now, Europe is in a terrible state. They've been ruined by the Ukraine war. They've been ruined by the Americans, actually. They've been ruined. Germany, which you mentioned, is ruined facing ruin, economic ruin and social disaster, but there's a lot of discontent in Germany also. Why? Because this madness of the Ukraine business meant that they cut off from their main supply of cheap oil and gas, which was from Russia. And the Americans were behind that. There's no two ways about it. It suited the Americans very well. They were behind the destruction of Nord Stream. Don't believe anything else. It was the Americans behind that. So this is a catastrophe for Europe, and America's responsible. And yet the stupid American, European bourgeoisie, most of them, are still licking the boots of American imperialism. I don't understand it myself, except that they've lost all any sense of understanding. You know, it just brings to mind what the Greeks used to say. You know, those who the gods wish to destroy, they first make them mad. These people are mad. But in any case, let them carry on with their madness. Now, we don't have much time left, but you see, we must draw some conclusions from all this. The election of Trump does make a difference. The argument that it won't make any difference is false. It will make a difference. But it will mean a colossal increase in the turbulence that already exists. The instability already exists. Trump didn't invent that. It reflects the crisis, the general crisis of the capitalist system on a world scale. Okay. But by his antics and by his policy, he will undoubtedly increase the turbulence, increase the instability. And that will aggravate all the social tensions and political tensions in America and internationally. You find America now will enter a very turbulent period. They won't be what Trump promises them, a glowing future of prosperity, nothing of the sort. And in Europe, it will be the same. And the entire world will be faced with a very turbulent position, aggravated by Trump's policies. I mean, this is hardly a very promising recipe.
Okay, just to finish on the last question, following from what you just said,
yeah.
We have been talking a lot in the Revolutionary Communist International and analyzing the crisis, you can say, maybe, of U.S. imperialism, as in that on certain levels it has reached a limit. It's still obviously the biggest military and economic power on the planet, unchallenged in how do you say in those terms yet. However, it has been entering as a period of relative decline relative to other rising powers. And this has put certain obstacles from them. What do you see how do you see Trump will affect this process going forward?
Well, that's an interesting question. You see, yes, America remains to this day the most powerful and the most economically and military powerful nation on earth. That's a fact. Yes, but this power has limits. People don't seem to understand that. The Europeans don't seem to understand that and Zelensky doesn't seem to understand that, making constant demands on the United States. The fact of the matter is that because of the Ukraine war, and now because of the mess in the Middle East, American imperialism is very, very overstretched. And because of the tensions in China also, which the Americans have whipped up stupidly over Taiwan. No, there's no point in doing that. Taiwan was doing very nicely on its own without anyone messing around with it. Now there's problems everywhere. Now, you see, there's limits to what the Americans can do, even militarily, as Zelensky will soon find out. They can't supply him with the weapons he's asking for. It's impossible. And the same thing with other countries. And you see, ultimately, it all boils down to economics. You know, America's running a deficit of, I think it's $34 trillion. That's a staggering amount. $34 million of deficit of money which they're spending, which they haven't got. And this colossal mountain of debt, which is looming over the American economy, is increasing, if you please, by the sum of $1 trillion every 3 months. I mean, that's unsustainable. From any point of view, that's unsustainable. And yet the demands on American power is increasing all the time. Now, I'd like to draw an historical analogy here. You can draw an analogy with the Roman Empire, you know, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. Many causes, of course. It's a complex question. I don't say any different. But one of the key elements in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire was the fact that they were overstretched. They overreached themselves. The limits of the empire expanded to such an extent, with creating a huge bloated bureaucracy and so on. Eventually, the whole thing collapsed. Now, is it possible that the United States may be approaching that point? I hesitate to answer that question definitively, but certainly all the elements are present. And someone like Trump, of course, will hasten it. That's all I would. He didn't cause this crisis. They've tried to say that he did. He didn't. But through his conduct and through his policies, which are they are what they are. They're policies which are calculated to create further crises and problems at all levels. And therefore, of course, the election of Trump will pose new problems for capitalism internationally. It will open up a new period of colossal social, economic, and political instability inside the United States. But out of this terrible mess, if you will, out of this tremendous mass of contradictions, tangled contradictions, you have a very explosive situation arising, which at a certain stage, I'll predict now as night follows day, at a certain stage, which you can't predict, there will emerge a formidable force, a revolutionary force on the left. You know what they say in elementary mechanics, Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. And that's the lesson. That's what we have to bear in mind. Therefore, my advice to our audience, to our viewers or our listeners is this about the United States of America. And by the way, this whole discussion would have been unthinkable just 10 years ago. We would be people talking about revolution in the United States, unthinkable. Well, it's not unthinkable anymore, is it? Not anymore, it isn't. And therefore, my advice is to everyone that's listening to this discussion, watch this space.
Thank you very much, Alan. I think that's a perfect place to end the conversation that we had today. I would like to thank all the hundreds of people who have been following online. Alan has written an article which was published as we were airing this program. It's at the top of the front page of Marxist.com. We will also post a link in the comments beneath this video. If you agree with the ideas and the perspectives that you've heard, or if you're interested to learn more about the Revolutionary Communist International, you can again go on Marxist.com and contact us via the comment section of the video, and we will contact you. The Revolutionary Communist International is an organization which organizes communists in more than 60 countries all over the world, and we are very much keen on getting you involved and getting you to work fighting for the cause of the working class everywhere. Besides that, I will leave you to it. We will be back tomorrow as on a regular schedule, 3 p.m. London time, for another discussion on the events of the past week, including US elections and much more. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for everyone else. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.